palace of Hastinapura, a grand structure located at the heart of the Kuru kingdom, shone brightly with golden light emanating from oil lamps hanging from the ceiling. However, beneath the magnificent exterior, there was an undercurrent of division and unrest. Overshadowed by an air of tension and foreboding. Within the stone walls of the palace, it was not just royal ceremonies and grand affairs that took place, but also a bitter and bloody struggle for power between brothers, between familial ties and betrayal, between dreams of supremacy and hatred that could not be reconciled. The story of this war did not simply begin with the conflict between two generations, but was also tied to the tragic past of the Kuru dynasty, where the division of power among the brothers became deeply embedded in the very fabric of each person. This division, originally a part of destiny and divine forces, had now transformed into the root cause of the bloody conflict later known as the Mahabharata, the war of heroes and enemies. Before the war for power between the Pandavas and Kauravas began, it is crucial to understand the origins of the enmity. At that time, the kingdom of Hastinapura was ruled by Dhritarashtra, a blind king. He was the elder brother of Pandu, the father of the Pandavas. However, due to his blindness, Dhritarashtra could not govern the kingdom directly and had entrusted the rule to his younger brother Pandu. Despite this, Dhritarashtra longed for the throne and sought to fulfill this desire through his son, Duryodhana. Duryodhana, the eldest son of Dhritarashtra, was the first to see the opportunity to seize power. With a strong, arrogant personality and boundless ambition, Duryodhana soon became the greatest adversary of the Pandavas in the battle for the throne. When Panda passed away at an early age, the responsibility of ruling the kingdom was handed over to Dhritarashtra, but Duryodhana's life was never at peace, as he had to witness the growth and strength of the Pandavas, sons of Pandu, who were well liked by the people. The rivalry between these two families was not just a personal conflict for Duryodhana, but rather an ongoing power struggle between generations. From an early age, Duryodhana nurtured within himself a sense of resentment and distrust towards the perceived fairness of society, which only worsened as he was influenced by the words of those around him. Particularly his close friend Shakuni, his uncle, began to weave dark schemes to bring down the Pandavas. Shakuni, with his craftiness and cunning, ignited a war full of bloodshed where every relationship was manipulated and trampled upon. But Duryodhana was not merely the adversary of the Pandavas, he was the embodiment of cruelty and unbridled ambition. While he could be considered a brilliant strategist, Duryodhana's actions were not based on moral principles but on arrogance and underhanded calculations. He continuously sought to undermine the Pandavas, from seizing their lands to luring them into dangerous situations. When the war between the Pandavas and Kauravas began, it was not merely a power struggle between brothers. It became a battle between conflicting values, the integrity of the Pandavas versus the deviousness and deceit of Duryodhana and the Kauravas. The backdrop of this conflict was not only confined to the Kuru family but had a global scale, with interventions by divine beings, supernatural forces, and intense battles for ultimate power. From seemingly innocuous events, such as a succession contest, to the elaborate deceptions and machinations of Duryodhana and Shakuni, the war began to unfold as a meticulously planned scheme, with traps, false promises, and underhanded tactics. Everyone in the Kaurava family became involved in these schemes, and no one could avoid being swept into the conflict. One of the particularly significant events that marked the beginning of the war was the infamous game of dice at Hastinapura, where Duryodhana tricked the Pandavas into participating in a rigged game of gambling. This game led to the Pandavas being exiled from Hastinapura, stripped of their wealth and power, and forced to live in the wilderness for 12 years. For the Pandavas, this was a painful tragedy, but it also became a time for them to train and prepare for a greater war. As the war grew fiercer, it was not just Duryodhana and the Kauravas who were formidable enemies, but also the appearance of terrifying allies. At the forefront of these was Karna, Duryodhana's close friend, a warrior of exceptional skill in battle and strategy. Karna, with his unwavering loyalty to Duryodhana, became an invincible fighter, making him a powerful adversary for the Pandavas. But behind Karna's devotion and loyalty lay a tragic story of his own, one filled with social discrimination and hidden secrets that Karna had to endure. In addition to Karna, other key figures entered the fray, including Dronacharya, the martial teacher of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and Bhishma, the head of the Kuru family. These great warriors, with their superior strength and intelligence, had complicated relationships with both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, creating a tense and challenging situation. The battles between these figures were not merely physical confrontations, but also spiritual struggles, conflicts of loyalty, emotion, and responsibility. The tension that had been brewing between the Pandavas and Kauravas finally reached a boiling point. The conflict between these two factions, which had begun with jealousy, betrayal, and ambition, now stood at its most intense and bitter moment. The battlefield of Kurukshetra was no longer a distant dream, but an inevitable reality where the fate of an entire kingdom would be determined by the clash of arms, wits, and unyielding wills. This final confrontation had been set into motion by the tragic events that unfolded at the gambling game in Hastinapura. It was there that Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas and their rightful leader, was forced into a game of chance, a game that would change the course of history forever. The fate of the Pandavas, their kingdom, and their honor all hinged on this game, a cruel and unfair trick set in motion by Duryodhana and his uncle Shakuni. The atmosphere in Hastinapura was thick with deceit as the dice rolled and the Pandavas were drawn deeper into the trap. Yudhishthira, the son of King Pandu, was a man of honor and virtue, known for his wisdom and fairness. He had never desired power for its own sake, only wishing to rule justly and wisely. However, the circumstances that led him to this fateful game were beyond his control. As the Pandavas grew stronger, Duryodhana became more envious and fearful of their growing influence. Manipulated by his uncle Shakuni, Duryodhana devised a plot to undermine the Pandavas by inviting Yudhishthira to play a game of dice. The stakes were high, and the terms of the game were rigged from the start. Reluctantly, Yudhishthira agreed to play, knowing that turning down the challenge could result in dire consequences for his family. The game was played with loaded dice, and it was only a matter of time before Yudhishthira, despite his wisdom, found himself losing. One move after another, the Pandavas lost more and more until the stakes reached their terrifying height, the loss of their kingdom, their wealth, and their freedom. In the end, Yudhishthira, in a moment of despair and confusion, gambled away everything, including himself and his brothers. The consequences were devastating. The Pandavas were ordered to go into exile for 12 years, living in the wilderness, and for the 13th year, they were to remain in disguise. This exile was not just a physical punishment, it was a blow to their pride and honor. To be stripped of their kingdom, to be forced into hiding, this was more than just a loss of land. It was a loss of everything the Pandavas had ever fought for. Despite the heavy blow of their exile, the Pandavas refused to bow to their fate. While they lived in the forest, separated from the luxuries of their former life, they did not give up their dream of reclaiming their kingdom. This period of exile became one of introspection, training, and growth. Each brother found his own way to cope with the immense hardships they faced, and each learned valuable lessons that would aid them in the upcoming battle. Yudhishthira, though devastated, found strength in his belief in righteousness and justice. Arjuna, the great archer, spent years refining his skills, preparing for the battle he knew would one day come. Bhima, known for his immense strength, trained tirelessly to ensure he would be ready to confront his foes with the power necessary to defeat them. Nakula and Sahdeva, the twins, honed their skills in swordsmanship and strategy, knowing that every skill they acquired would contribute to their ultimate goal, to reclaim their kingdom from Duryodhana and the Kauravas. During this time, the Pandavas also received guidance from their mentors and allies. Lord Krishna, their cousin and charioteer, played a crucial role in shaping their resolve and preparing them for the challenges ahead. Krishna's wisdom and counsel became a beacon of hope and direction for the Pandavas, teaching them not just how to fight, but how to fight for what was right. The Pandavas did not only face physical challenges during their exile, but also emotional and spiritual ones. They were often confronted with doubts, fears, and feelings of helplessness. However, through their unwavering belief in Dharma, righteousness, they managed to keep their spirits high and their purpose clear. Their journey through the wilderness was one of transformation, and by the time their exile came to an end, they were not just warriors. They were embodiments of justice, truth, and determination. The Pandavas' return to Hastinapura after 12 years was not just a homecoming. It was the moment they would demand what was rightfully theirs, the kingdom. Despite the suffering they had endured, they did not return with vengeance in their hearts, but with a desire for justice. They sought a peaceful resolution to the conflict, offering Duryodhana a chance to return the kingdom peacefully, hoping to avoid bloodshed. They sent Krishna as their emissary to negotiate with the Kauravas, but Duryodhana, consumed by pride and jealousy, refused their offer. He was not willing to part with the kingdom even for a moment, and his response was clear: war was inevitable. At this moment, the war cry, victory or death, rang throughout the land. The stakes had been set and there was no turning back. The Pandavas knew that the time for diplomacy had passed. Their honor and their future were on the line, and they could not afford to back down. The stage was set for the Battle of Kurukshetra, the great war that would decide the fate of the Kuru dynasty. It was here, on this vast battlefield, that the Pandavas and Kauravas would face off in a conflict that would involve not just armies, but also divine beings, cosmic forces, and the very essence of Dharma itself. On one side stood the Pandavas, backed by Krishna, the supreme divine guide, along with a host of great warriors and allies. On the other side stood the Kauravas, led by Duryodhana and bolstered by powerful figures such as Karna, Dronacharya, and Bhishma. The battle was not only a contest of physical might, but also of righteousness versus ambition, truth versus deception. The warriors on both sides knew that this would be no ordinary battle. It would be a battle for the future of the Kuru dynasty, a battle where the fate of an entire kingdom, and perhaps even the world, would be determined. As the two armies lined up on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the air was thick with tension and the ground trembled beneath the weight of the momentous event about to unfold. While the physical battles were brutal and fierce, the real struggle lay within the hearts of the warriors. Many of them were not just fighting for the kingdom, but also for their families, their beliefs, and their loyalty. For example, Bhishma, the commander of the Kaurava forces, was bound by his oath to the throne of Hastinapura, and despite his personal love and respect for the Pandavas, he fought for Duryodhana because of his duty to his oath. This internal conflict was mirrored by many others who were caught between their loyalty to their families and their sense of what was right. The battlefield was not just a place of bloodshed, but also of profound moral dilemmas. Arjuna, the greatest warrior of the Pandavas, faced an internal crisis when he found himself on the verge of fighting against his own kin. Torn between his duty as a warrior and his love for his family, Arjuna turned to Krishna for guidance. It was here that Krishna delivered the Bhagavad Gita, a spiritual and philosophical discourse that would shape the very essence of the battle and the fate of those involved. In the long and arduous years of exile, as the Pandavas wandered through forests and endured suffering, one figure appeared to offer them guidance, hope, and divine assistance: Krishna, the incarnation of the god Vishnu. The Pandavas had longed for a resolution to the conflict, and Krishna's arrival was a turning point in their journey. As they struggled to rebuild their lives and find a path forward, Krishna became their closest confidant, advisor, and protector. Krishna's role in the Pandavas' lives was not merely that of a friend, but also a divine guide, one who would lead them not just in battle but in life itself. His wisdom and strategic acumen would become crucial as the conflict between the Pandavas and Kauravas reached its climax. The Pandavas' life in exile was not just a test of their endurance but a time of deep reflection. They had been stripped of everything: their kingdom, their wealth, and their status. Yet despite the hardships, they remained resolute in their belief that righteousness, Dharma, would ultimately prevail. However, the path back to their kingdom seemed distant, with no clear way forward. It was during this period of uncertainty that Krishna appeared to them. Krishna's appearance was a divine intervention. He was not just a prince of the Yadava clan. He was the incarnation of Vishnu, the supreme god responsible for preserving and protecting the universe. Krishna's arrival was a reminder to the Pandavas that they were not alone and that the forces of good would support them in their time of need. It was during this time of exile that Krishna first sought out the Pandavas, offering them not just companionship but divine counsel. His presence gave the Pandavas strength, and his wisdom helped them navigate the emotional and moral dilemmas that came with their forced exile. Krishna, in his ever-gracious manner, reassured them that their suffering was not in vain and that justice would prevail in the end. Before the war began, Krishna took on the role of a diplomat, attempting to mediate between the Pandavas and Kauravas. His first task was to convince Duryodhana, the leader of the Kauravas, to return the Pandavas' kingdom and avoid a war that would result in untold bloodshed. Krishna, who was highly respected by both the Pandavas and Kauravas, was the perfect messenger to convey the desires of the Pandavas for peace. Krishna's attempt to reconcile the two factions was rooted in his belief that war could be avoided, and that a peaceful solution was the best outcome for everyone involved. He personally journeyed to Hastinapura and spoke with Duryodhana and his court, offering them a chance for reconciliation. Krishna, with his usual charm and intelligence, made it clear that the Pandavas were willing to accept a fair share of land, avoiding war if possible. However, Duryodhana, blinded by pride and a deep-seated fear of the Pandavas, rejected Krishna's proposal. He was unwilling to part with even the smallest piece of land, and the diplomatic efforts failed. Duryodhana's refusal to listen to Krishna's wise counsel sealed the fate of the Kuru dynasty. Krishna, in his role as a divine guide, understood that the time for diplomacy was over. War had become inevitable. With the failure of diplomacy, the stage was set for war. As the armies prepared for battle on the fields of Kurukshetra, Krishna's role took on a new and more significant dimension. Arjuna, the greatest warrior of the Pandavas, stood at the forefront of this conflict. He was a formidable archer, capable of taking down any foe. Yet, as the war began to unfold, Arjuna found himself torn between his duty as a warrior and his love for his family. The idea of fighting against his own kin, the Kauravas, his cousins, and teachers filled him with doubt and despair. At this critical moment, Krishna intervened once again. As Arjuna sat in his chariot, conflicted and unwilling to fight, Krishna offered him divine guidance in the form of the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most important texts in Hindu philosophy. The Gita is a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna where Krishna imparts his wisdom on a range of topics, from duty and righteousness to the nature of the self and the universe. In the Gita, Krishna reveals the concept of Dharma, or righteous duty, which is central to the Hindu worldview. He explains that Arjuna's duty as a warrior is to fight for righteousness, and that it is not the individual who is important, but the fulfillment of one's duty. Krishna urges Arjuna to transcend his personal feelings and act according to the greater good, for in doing so, he would fulfill his divine purpose. Krishna also speaks of the immortality of the soul, teaching Arjuna that death is merely the transformation of the body and the soul is eternal. This philosophical teaching was designed to help Arjuna overcome his fear of death and hesitation to fight. Krishna, in his role as Arjuna's guide, helps him see that he must act according to his nature and duty as a warrior, even if it means fighting against his own family. This powerful message gave Arjuna the strength to rise above his doubts and prepare for battle. Once the battle began, Krishna continued to serve as a guide and protector for the Pandavas. As Arjuna's charioteer, Krishna was at the forefront of the action, directing Arjuna's movements on the battlefield and ensuring that he was able to fulfill his destiny. Krishna's support during the battle was not just that of a mortal ally but of a divine being whose presence was felt by all. His guidance was essential in turning the tide of the war in favor of the Pandavas. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to hear the next part, please leave a comment. I will post the next part tomorrow, and I look forward to being with you again. Thank you very much.